Hello and welcome back. Here we are. We've reached the number one breakout fantasy player from 23-24, and this one should be obvious from the thumbnail. It's Evan Bouchard. Now, if you're new to this series, this was a look at players whose 23-24 completeness rating on the Player Hub was significantly higher than their 3-year average, and that's definitely the case with Evan Bouchard. Now, as I lamented last video, the 2018 NHL Draft was a huge swing and miss for my New York Rangers, who picked Vitaly Kravtsov over both Noah Dobson and Evan Bouchard. And while Dobson is the more immediate concern as he's in their division, seeing what Bouchard did both in the regular season but also in the deep playoff run for the Oilers makes it hurt that much more. Now, by the time the draft came, Bouchard had already won a Memorial Cup with London of the OHL back in 2016-17. And then he followed that up with awards for the best defenseman and MVP of the OHL in his draft year, and put up 87 points in 67 games, and somehow the Rangers decided to pass on that. After spending some time with Bakersfield in 18-19 and playing some Allsvenskan hockey during the COVID lockout, Bouchard continued to progress. Now, he only played 14 games in 2021, but all of those games were with the Oilers, showing that his days of junior and the AHL were behind him. In 21-22, Bouchard played his first full season in the NHL, notching 12 goals and 43 points in 81 games. In 22-23, the Oilers shipped out then power play quarterback Tyson Barrie to the Predators and brought in Mattias Ekholm. This opened up a spot on the top power play unit for Bouchard, who got hot late in the season, averaging just under a point per game and ranking 6th in points by a defenseman after the All-Star break. All of this set the stage for his breakout year in 23-24, where he had the power play assignment locked up and took full advantage of it, notching 18 goals, 64 assists, 82 points in 81 games. He finished 5th in goals, 4th in points by a defenseman, and the top 4 defensemen in those categories were above a point per game. So he's one of the few who is above a point per game in terms of defensemen, which is obviously very valuable in fantasy. Now, as we turn to his player hub, the first thing that I notice is his durability, believe it or not. 81 games, 82 games, 81 games. When you're drafting a guy in the range that he will likely go in, you're going to want to have that guy in your lineup more often than not. You don't want somebody who's going to get injured, and he's been very consistent in that regard. Now, obviously, the next thing that you notice, the power play points. 0.43 power play points per game, 98th percentile in the entire league. That's a lot of assists, obviously 98th percentile there. It is assist heavy on the power play, but 35 power play points, 8 of those are power play goals, which is not bad either. So if you're in a points league that weighs those a little bit heavier, he's going to be dynamic. That's where you're going to want to target him. He may not be the second or third best option behind Makar in a categories league because his completeness isn't quite as high as a guy like Dahlin or somebody like that who does hit and block a little bit more. But in points leagues, he's definitely a top 5 defenseman in fantasy this year. Now, if you happen to play in a plus-minus league, he's been above a plus player his entire career, plus 10, plus 6, but plus 34. And the reason why that's incredible, he has 35 power play points, and those don't count for plus minus. So in addition to those, he was also plus 34, which is incredible. You think of him as a power play specialist, but he was scoring 5-on-5 as well. Obviously, you're getting that exposure to McDavid and Draisaitl, and they've brought in some more weapons this offseason. So this should be a really nice recipe for Evan Bouchard's file next year. Now, one other thing that I wanted to mention is this uptrend and the overdraft. So you can see him trending up, taking a little bit of a step back, and then this huge jump from 66 to 83 is why he's number 1 on this list, in addition to the fact he's one of the 3 or 4 point per game defensemen in the entire league. This overdraft is baking in that first season where he only played 12 games and he wasn't a full-fledged member of the Oilers at that point. So this is also kind of a little bit misleading just because he's a young player. He's only 24 years old. So he's still up and coming. He's reaching his prime right now. So I would not necessarily consider this an overdraft. This is a data, type of thing where you're baking in this previous season. I would expect him to go somewhere between 18 and 35 overall in this year's draft, probably be the 4th or 5th defenseman off the board. And in that range, it's hard to be quote unquote value because what you're hoping for in that range is that he just stays at that position. And by the end of the season, he's in the top 20 or 30 best overall players in your fantasy league. But it is likely that that's going to happen because of what I just said. He's 24. He's got that power play spot locked up. There's no competition trying to push him out of that. So this should be as much of a slam dunk as you can find in fantasy. I don't want to jinx it, however, so take that with a grain of salt. But again, I don't think this is a huge value pick, but it will be a relatively safe pick, as Dobson would be, I would imagine. You're just getting a higher, more prolific power play unit that he's quarterbacking, in this case with Bouchard. Now, before we end this video, let me bring you into the file that I used for this analysis. And I'll admit, I had slides prepared for at least 4 or 5 other players before making some adjustments based on point totals and eye test. So the way this was calculated, we have a 3-year average of the previous 3 seasons, and then we have their rating last year, and then we sorted that by the difference between the 2 numbers. So judging on this, Zetterlund had to be in this video. He was the #1 guy in terms of the difference between his rating last year and previous years. Now this year, he may get a lesser role because they brought in Tyler Toffoli, and they're probably bringing in Will Smith this year, so maybe he gets bumped off that top power play. That's something to keep in mind. Gunther, we went over. He's a guy that I would be very high on this year. There's a couple of veterans that will potentially get talked about. Guys like Robert Thomas had a good year. Bugstad is a really solid option off the waiver wire. We know what Frank Vetrano did last year. Very complete, really hot start at the beginning of the year. Charlie Coyle with that #1 center spot was very good. I wonder how that works with him potentially losing that to Elias Lindholm. Then you've got Jack Quinn, who I definitely had a video planned for. I also had a video planned for his line mate, Dylan Cousins, who's way down here. Both of those guys had pretty good statistical cases in terms of this. However, Dylan Cousins technically had a down year last year. His breakout year was the previous year. But that whole line, Cousins, Quinn, and Peterka, I had a video prepared on. That might come out in the future. I'm not sure if I'll get back to it, but all 3 of those guys should be on your list in terms of deep targets for next season. Brady Shea coming to a new team, that might shake things up a little bit, but he was very good last year, and that's arguably why he got such a huge contract in the offseason. Gabe Velarde didn't play a ton of time, but when he was there, he was still really good. 69 overall is not bad. That's pretty much a very consistent waiver wire pickup in a 12-team league. We mentioned Jarvis and Johnston in this video. Trevor Moore is one of my staples. He's a go-to for me off the waiver wire. I always like to go to him in terms of picking up LA guys when they have a good week. Here's your Evan Bouchard with that 17 difference, up to an 83, the highest rated player on this list. He had to be #1 for that purpose. You can see over here, Lucas Raymond. Now, that's a special case because he's pretty much the exact same age as a guy like Alexi Lafreniere, but obviously he had a breakout year this year. I just didn't classify it. I consider him more of a veteran. I don't know why I did that, but I had a video prepped for him as well. So if you're going to yell at me in the comments section, what about this guy? What about that guy? What about Raymond? He was in the mix. He was definitely in this range somewhere, but I just had so many other guys that I wanted to give a little bit of attention to, and I may or may not feature Raymond in a separate video, so stay tuned for that. Hope you like this view of the top, a look back at the top 23-24 players. I got a comment about why these are a look back instead of a look ahead. We will do a look ahead at 24-25 and some targets for you as we head towards draft season. But thank you all for watching in the off season, and stay tuned for the next video. As always, I'll see you there.